Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fensky. Composer Tobias Picker has 5 operas to his credit. That includes commissions from the LA Opera and the Metropolitan Opera, among others. But his 6th opera has personal resonance. This opera makes its world premiere here in St. Louis this June. And the librettist writing the words to go with Picker's music is his husband, Dr. Aryeh Lev Stollman. Dr. Stollman had good reason to sign on for this effort. It's not just that he's a writer, although he is. He's also a physician. And this opera is an adaptation of Dr. Oliver Sacks' medical memoir, Awakenings. A little medical knowledge definitely came in handy. So joining me in studio to give us a sneak peek at this opera are Tobias Picker and Dr. Aryeh Lev Stollman. Tobias, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Dr. Stollman, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, Dr. Stollman, I have to start with you. You're a neuroradiologist at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. You're also a novelist. What made you decide to add opera to your resume?
Well, when the project came about, Awakenings, and over the years I've watched Tobias or listened to Tobias work on the other operas, I felt this was one opera that I was very drawn to the story that I could contribute to.
Had you read the book even before he started working on this?
I'd read the book before. I'd known the book from a long time ago when it was first published. And it's a very compelling story, a universal story of struggle with illness and to overcome illness and accommodate to illness in the end. And I felt that this was something I could contribute to, and it was a very compelling story.
Now, it can be very wonderful for couples to work together. It can also be very fraught for couples to work together. Tobias, having been an opera composer for a while, did you have any reservations about your husband joining you in this line of work?
No, with this subject, it just seemed like this was the time, this was the moment, and that it was in a way destined. Oliver Sacks, who was a world figure and leading neurologist and writer about unusual medical and neurological conditions, was a close personal friend of mine. He was also a friend of Aryeh's. So he had always hoped that I could make this into an opera. We talked about it many times.
So he had you in mind for this.
Well, yeah, we yes.
And that's so flattering. I mean, because he's such a luminary, was such a luminary, both as a writer and as a physician.
Right, and so he wanted it to be done, and it just he didn't. He died right before Jim Robinson, artistic director of the opera company here, found out that I had the rights to Awakenings, but he'd be very pleased, I think, by what Aryeh has done with his work and the beauty of prose that he's captured.
Now, Dr. Stollman, I feel like you have a real challenge here. I mean, yes, there's the beautiful prose, but there's also these medical terms. It seems like encephalitis doesn't necessarily lend itself to singing. How do you deal with that complication?
That's actually my problem.
So tell me how that works.
But there are not many medical terms. Encephalitis lethargica was the illness that these people suffered from. It's the medical term for the sleepy sickness. But there's a chorus of
medical treatments that failed that we put in multiple terms. But I think we try to not overwhelm the opera score, the libretto, and the opera with medical terms. It's something that within context is understandable, and nothing goes by unexplained.
You don't need a medical education to understand this opera.
And it's really about the people. It's not about the medical terms.
And encephalitis lethargica has its own theme. So, and then whenever it's it comes back. It's that music.
Now, Tobias, you said this is actually your challenge to make encephalitis lethargica work in music. How does this process work? Do you write the music first and then he's writing lyrics, or you're writing lyrics first?
It's usually the words come first, and then I write the music, and then the words may get changed, and then the music may get changed. But with our collaboration, since we're just we're in the same place, it's very easy just to say, hey, can you come in here for a minute and look at this? Do we have to have a comma here? Or could I have another word for that?
But we also did it differently than the other operas, because I had a concept of the story, the arc of the story, and I wrote. Usually Tobias works, he has an entire libretto, and then he writes the music for that, and they go back and forth with his other librettists. He's had wonderful librettists. But I wrote the first scene, and then he started writing the music right away, and while he was writing the music for that, I was working on the second scene.
He stayed one step ahead of me. I had never done that before.
But it worked. What
made you decide to go that way? Were you just so excited about what he was working on you couldn't help yourself?
To be honest, well, we were very excited about the project, because once we did the first scene, we realized this was something that had fire in it. But to be honest about it, we didn't have time for him to finish a libretto and me do something else and then start writing the opera. There just wasn't.
There was a
time.
quick turnaround on this.
It was a very quick turnaround.
But I also think, in a strange way or in a wonderful way, there was a sort of a mutual inspiration. When I heard the music after the first scene, it made me. It was so beautiful, and it inspired me to keep going in a much more rapid way than I am usually as a writer. So.
Now, you two just talked a bit about, sort of talking from room to room and giving each other input. I know for some married couples that work together, it can be really stressful unless you can sort of separate the work from the home. But it sounds like you guys didn't do this in this case. You were kind of all in while you were working on this.
I think so.
Did it ever lead to any tensions?
It worked better when we were in one of our homes at the same time than if one of us was traveling. Because as soon as I wrote something, I wanted him to hear it, and as soon as he wrote something, he wanted me to read it. I mean, one can do that electronically, and I'd done it before with librettists, but it was more real. It made everything more real for both of us, and I think it makes the opera itself more real.
We're talking to Tobias Picker. He's the composer of the new opera Awakenings, which will make its debut in June. And we're also talking to his husband, Dr. Aryeh Lev Stollman, who has written the libretto for this piece. And I'm excited to say for our listeners, we have some music from the show, and I think we'd be remiss not to give people a sneak peek. Now, this was recorded at the workshop, which was last fall in Cincinnati.
Yes.
And we're going to hear a piece called If Time Stood Still for Us. So set the scene for us. First, for people who may not be familiar with the book or the film, if you could just give us a little overview of what this story is and then what is happening in this scene where this song comes in.
So in this scene, we have two characters, Rose and Miriam, both who had, children, encephalitis lethargica, and had been, closed off because they couldn't move or talk for 30, 40 years, depending on each character. And then they're treated with the L-Dopa, which makes them better. But then there's so many side effects, and they have to go off the L-Dopa. But they're having a little discussion. Rose has a more lively imaginary life, and she realizes it's an imaginary life. And Miriam is sort of saying, well, it's not real what you're imagining a lover and a husband. But they're having this discussion, and finally they sort of agree that because of their lives, they're entitled to have this an imaginary life, that to dream. It's really about, is it okay to dream? And it's a very beautiful moment where they sort of come together and think about that.
Well, let's listen to If Time Stood Still for Us. This is from the new opera, Awakenings.
What
and that's If Time Stood Still for Us. It's from the new opera Awakenings. Tobias, this is such a beautiful melody. The first time I heard it, it almost brought tears to my eyes. I feel like so many new operas try to sound modern, or they'll go for something that sounds kind of dissonant. What inspired you to go in more of a classic direction here?
All of my operas are very direct, musically and emotionally. For me, opera is the experience of opera should be an emotional experience, and if the music doesn't go straight into your heart, then you can't have an emotional experience that's cathartic. That's just the way I write operas or and other music. But the theme, we spoke earlier of the medical aspect of this opera, but it's really the metaphorical implications or frameworks for this story are very accessible to anyone who may be on the fence about whether they should come and see it. What it really is no one ever wrote an opera based on Sleeping Beauty, ever. There's a great ballet by Tchaikovsky. Nobody ever, well, there were some minor operettas written about Rip Van Winkle in the 19th century that went away. Those two subjects have never been approached in opera.
And why do you think that is? Sleeping Beauty is such a classic.
Well, it has a happy ending, and
you can't have that.
Rip Van. But this is, we frame the entire opera with the tale of Sleeping Beauty based on the original Grimm's, and so it begins and ends with the story of Sleeping Beauty. So it really is, but it's as if Sleeping Beauty had been awakened, but after she marries the prince, has to go back to sleep. And the same with Rip Van Winkle. He awakens and sees the world as it is today, but then he has to go back to sleep. And I found that arc extremely compelling and something. Sorry?
Oh, but I also wanted to point out that even though there's a certain sadness in that, the opera itself has a lot of love in it. There's a lot of love between the patients and their family and between characters. So even though it is in some ways a sad story, it's also a story with lots of love in it.
There's also a kind of redemption at the end
that's
of the opera that is not something I've done before in this first time in 6 operas.
And that's a very important point, that, an accommodation to their situation and love. There's a lot of love there.
Now, we have another selection from the workshop in Cincinnati this past fall, and this is called What Is This I See? What is going on here?
This is another scene where one patient, Leonard, he's actually in love with his nurse. But something in the background, a lot of the patients, because of the L-DOPA treatment and their disease or their illness, had hallucinations or not just dreams like in case of Rose, but he had hallucinations. But this is he's in love with Rodriguez. It's an unrequited love, but in this hallucination he's seeing Rodriguez and they're coming together as lovers. And what is this I see is this scene.
So let's play this. It's called What Is This I See?
What is this I see? Those handsome lovers there, who are they? I know
and that's What Is This I See from the new opera Awakenings. I was kind of curious, the film implies that the character who's based on Dr. Sachs ends up sort of in a romantic relationship with a female nurse. And we know that the real Dr. Sachs, his personal life was not at all that he dated a young female nurse. He ended up finding love at 77 with a male partner. Right. And I'm wondering, do you touch at all on that in this opera?
Well, at the time of Awakenings, when he wrote the Awakenings, he was in the closet. Mm-hmm. And but we knew that we know him, and he was gay, and we wanted to put that in there. There's a lot of unrequited, gay love in the opera, but we didn't want.
There's a unrequited love triangle, actually.
Okay.
Between Leonard, Nurse Rodriguez, and Sachs, and Sachs is almost oblivious to everything. But we wanted to put in who he really was, mm-hmm. not a Hollywood version where, which is different. I mean, which is fine, but it's
sure.
different of its time.
Sure.
It was
this movie was in the 90s, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a beautiful movie, but it was of its time.
So it sounds like this version of Awakenings has things that physicians may enjoy. It has things that people who love romance, people who want redemption in the end. Well, I'm really excited about this show.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Aryeh Lev Stollman, librettist of the Awakenings, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And Tobias Picker, composer of Awakenings, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And that opera will make its debut in June, and that's at Opera Theater of St. Louis. If you want more information about that, you can get that on their website. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.